Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Nick Wilson. He spent years as a police detective witnessing and experiencing himself the burdens police officers and other first responders bear by seeing the most traumatic situations and leading people, often most vulnerable, through them, or worse, seeing them not make it through, and exercising perfect judgment during it all. It weighs on human beings in ways that lead some people into coping behaviors, and in a line of work where peer acceptance is crucially important, there often exists a culture of quiet stoicism in the face of emotional trauma, even when it's rooted in compassion. Nick started writing and posting about normalizing the feelings that first responders experience every day to show that it's okay to seek help. Now, if these ramifications mean anything to you, Pete, Scott, and I invite you to support our favorite cause, Save the Brave. You can see them at savethebrave.org. They're a certified 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans cope with post-traumatic stress. You can read all about them and donate a few bucks too. We all support Save the Brave with recurring contributions right out of our PayPal accounts, and Scott Husing even serves on their board. They do great work, and we urge you to support them or at least consider it. And if you would buy a combat veteran a lunch once a month, well, that's about what we're asking. So go to savethebrave.org and set it up. We also ask that you support The Break It Down Show on whatever platform you're listening to us, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube. Please help us out with a 5-star rating and a positive review. It helps new listeners find us, and we really appreciate you doing it. And we appreciate you listening. Here's our guest today, Nick Wilson.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Nick Wilson, and you're listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
We're here at Hana in, what is this, Rancho Santa Margarita?
Rancho Santa Margarita, Hannah's.
Hannah's in Rancho Santa Margarita with a guy that Scott Husing calls Handsome Rob. And I call him Joe Giuliani. He's a friend of mine. And I always, I tell people in my life, like, look, think of my show as your show. And let's produce an episode together. And you're like, all right, well, how about Nick? He's got an incredible story. So we're going to start right now, and we're going to find out about Nick's story. And I see that you have a service dog down there, too. Who's that?
I do. This is Stryker. Stryker came from the Patriotic Service Dog Foundation, and they have become a huge part of my life.
Let's dive in deep, and why you say your story's not special. We talked before, but every story is special, and you've done extraordinary things to get here today. Talk about that crazy path. Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from the Break It Down Show, checking in real quick to ask you this. John, Scott, and I all support Save the Brave with our time, our location, our effort, and our money. Each month we give a small amount. Do the same with us. Go to savethebrave.org, click on the Donate tab, pick an amount that you want to come out each month, and they will handle all the rest. I stand behind these folks. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show. Today, talk about that crazy path.
It was, and I should say, when I say that my story is not special, what I really mean is that it's not unique. My story is something that so many other law enforcement officers have experienced. I was a police officer for 13 years. I did everything that I wanted to do in my career. And I grew up in a culture in law enforcement that never really gave permission to experience the array of things that police officers experience when it comes to trauma. The reality is that when I grew up in this culture, it was to essentially say, when things hit the fan, it was pick yourself up, carry on, and move forward. We used to say, sorry about that shit. And so as my career unfolded and I started experiencing the critical incidences that I did, whether it was the body mutilations, the death, the child deaths, the loss of partners, the suicides, it had a tremendous effect and impact on me, psychologically, emotionally. And so I started to essentially experience the physiological symptoms that stress and trauma have on the body. And so when this happened, I realized that something was really wrong with me, and that started with my sleeping patterns. I went downhill from there. My healing journey started 3 years ago, and that's what I really want to talk about and what's going to happen moving forward.
To get to that path, to get to that healing point, though, you had to take a lot of things down in with you. You talked about, well, just in general, police, you guys collect experiences from the worst moment in someone's life.
Yes.
Over and over and over and over again.
Right.
To where you become desensitized to bodies, young people being dead,
right?
Or on a path to death.
Yeah.
You get to watch. Sometimes you get to watch that person. We've been on a call with them, Code Blue, 4 different times. Who cares anymore?
Yeah,
right. That's not a normal path, and we don't think about that in the common public.
Right. And so what I like to do is really dig deep into this, right? So society, what we have is essentially law enforcement as a career and as a profession hires people that are very strong and resilient. They are the type A personalities that don't know typically how to ask for help. There's a certain personality trait that is required in order to be a police officer. And so it was a very good point that you brought up. Police officers throughout their career experience trauma on a level that most people, if they see once or twice in their life, changes them. It truly affects them. And so what we're talking about in a much deeper sense is the accumulation of trauma. It is a cumulative stress and trauma that starts to change and deteriorate the mind and the body as a police officer goes through his or her career. And when this happens, the things that we don't really discuss are the things called compassion fatigue, which is experiencing someone else's trauma vicariously and seeing other people on their worst day going through their worst moments and darkest moments. And, police officers look at the victims of crimes, of violent crimes, and they experience compassion fatigue on a whole new level. This is one very small component to the array of issues that police officers have to deal with. But when you see accumulatively, over and over and over again, people suffering and experiencing pain and loss, that police officer experiences the compassion for them and understands their plight. And over time, that affects a police officer in ways that I had to experience that I never thought I would. I didn't even understand the concept of compassion fatigue. And real quickly with me, with what happened to me, I never thought that I would experience the troubles and the problems that I did in my career towards the end. 13 years in law enforcement. And I was so fortunate to have been able to do all the things that I wanted to do. But after time, I had 3 back surgeries from injuries that were sustained from fighting with suspects. I started to, after 3 surgeries, they prescribed me for the first time in my life narcotic pain medication. And I was really, really struggling. And as the years passed, before I promoted to detectives in 2010, I was also having significant problems with sleep for the first time in my life. And so I was prescribed, after about a year of going through sleep clinics and studies and receiving sleep aids and medication for sleep, they upped it to benzodiazepines. And they did that after they diagnosed me with PTSD. And just to illustrate, I always talk about the stigmas of in law enforcement when it comes to mental health, because we always want, to be strong in their law enforcement. They're expected to be strong and stoic. And for me, the stigma of being diagnosed with PTSD during that time was so humiliating for me. I thought it was that I was broken. And the second that I was diagnosed with that, I thought first, nobody in my department, if they ever found out, would find me credible, that it was a sign of weakness. And so I hid it from them and from everybody. And I'll never forget the time when a psychiatrist, when I was in detectives, a psychiatrist told me that I had PTSD, which I now refer to as PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury. I got up and I left his office, and I never wanted my name to be attached to a file that said Nick Wilson had PTSD. And so I canceled my insurance with Kaiser. That was significant for me. From there, I slowly started the process of numbing out. Trauma, critical incidences, experiencing people having tragedies on their worst day, my own physical pain that I was trying to numb and mask, my inability to sleep, depression set in, isolation set in, all of these things that so many officers today experience.
Before you go further, though, I'm going to ask you this.
Yeah.
So you're in the locker room with all the other cops getting ready for day to day. You're all in some form of that level of damage, right?
Yeah.
Some more than less than the others. How many of them would you guess are in the same level of self-medication or self-harm in some way?
Statistically, I don't know. I can tell you from my experience that whether it was with my department or elsewhere, it was unbelievable how many police officers, without talking about any mental health stuff, would drink. We would go and we used to call them a debrief. We would go debrief after work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And we'd go and we'd drink, and that's how we deal with things. There are other officers that I know of, that in their own trauma were self-medicating,
sure,
and with pills and with alcohol. And it was part of the culture. That was more culturally acceptable at that time than to talk about mental health issues or pathways towards healing. And so unfortunately, that's how law enforcement was designed, it was very much like the military in that sense,
Yeah, for sure.
A lot. It's estimated that over 86% of police officers will experience symptomology of post-traumatic stress. And so with that, I think when we see the suicide rates that are happening today, a huge part of the suicide rate is the big contributing factor is substance abuse.
Yeah.
For me, when I talk about self-medicating and numbing myself out, what I was experiencing for the first time in my life, when physiologically I knew something was wrong, and psychologically, what I mean is that is the first time I started experiencing that phrase that you commonly hear, suffering in silence. When I was a detective, I was promoted in 2010. I was working white supremacy organizations, and this became a 5-year investigation that the FBI, DEA, and other agencies, Homeland Security, got involved in. And I never spoke about or ever dealt with any of my own traumatic experiences.
Okay.
I brought my career into, being a detective. I brought all that trauma with me, and I continued to experience traumatic events as a detective when partners of mine had been shot, friends lost their lives, a friend of mine who committed suicide, and then years later another one who committed suicide. There was never an atmosphere where I ever felt safe coming forward and asking for help. And so...
Hold that right there. So one of the things I often say is, hey, at least no one's shooting at me. Or I'd rather be in combat than be here, right?
Right.
So if I understand you correctly, you're infiltrating white supremacy gangs.
Right.
So let I talk to the audience for a second. He's going undercover and posing as someone who's a white supremacist. And I'm going to ask you now, it's the whole setup. Would you rather be with those guys in danger, undercover, risk of constant exposure, or would you rather hide the mental thing, which was more dangerous for you?
100%. It was easier for me to go and work with informants and try to infiltrate a white supremacy organization or deal with the day-to-day stuff, whether we're executing search warrants, than ever have one conversation or discussion about mental health or how I was feeling. It does not... It's funny how we, in law enforcement, you know who's suffering, who's struggling, right?
Yeah.
It's so uncomfortable because of the culture to have a conversation about that, or to open up doors for healing, than it is to just take them, even when they're struggling the most, to grab the guy and go through the front door of a house to execute a search warrant.
Yeah.
And which then, unfortunately, if something were to happen there, a traumatic situation happens there, it just re-triggers what is already, it re-triggers someone, and it can re-traumatize someone. And so that kind of what was happening with me. I was thriving professionally. I mean, I immersed myself in the day-to-day activities at work, but personally, I was suffering.
Yeah.
And that led to the breakdown of my own family structure, and I slowly started the process of becoming addicted to pain medication and to benzos. And what happened to me in my life when I started experiencing that, I started realizing that I was in trouble. I was in real trouble. And it's not that I didn't know. I was a drug recognition expert. It's not that I did not know what the impacts would be or the consequences would be for long-term use and irresponsible use of medication would be. I knew.
Yeah.
I knew. And unfortunately, once I became addicted, it was essentially setting myself up for failure. One night, 2016, I lost my phone. This was shortly after the San Bernardino terrorist attack.
Okay.
I was on a task force, and thinking that Verizon would be open around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, I got into my car. It wasn't about 2 miles later, I crashed. I totaled my car, and I've said this before, where I sat in my car that was totaled, and it wasn't the first thing that I thought to pray to God that I was still alive. It wasn't the first thing that I thought to pray to God to ask, please don't tell me that I've killed somebody or hurt somebody else. To illustrate how significant the stigmas are, the first thing that I thought was, they're all going to know. My agency's going to know. My partners are going to know. And at the end of the day, I'm not going to have any credibility with them. I'm done. I knew that I might survive the DUI and the crash, but I knew that was going to begin the process of my own partners maybe losing faith in me. And that's when it was time for me to heal. I mean, I had already experienced a lot of physical injuries. I couldn't do the job anymore in terms of, I was on the SWAT team and detective and all that kind of stuff. I physically couldn't do the job because of the injuries, the physical injuries. But I also needed to heal.
You needed medicine to even try to do the job, right?
That was just a mask. It was a Band-Aid. That's what the medicine was, a Band-Aid. What I needed to do was heal on all levels, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. I needed to understand what happened to me. And so I began the process of a 3-year healing journey that I've been on. Shortly after that, the crash, the DUI, of which I instantaneously felt so much shame and embarrassment. I was so mad at myself that I even put those officers in a position, because they knew who I was. I put those officers in a position where they had to arrest me. And so I really began an isolation process that was really against my own, it was incongruent with who I was as a person. But I started this period of isolation and depression. I went to rehab.
So before rehab, let's back up.
Yeah.
You infiltrated white supremacy groups, right? As a guy that's a functional addict, or?
I wasn't, let's say, they have there's variations. There's like deep undercover, and
right.
Those are the guys that you see at ATF, and those so I wasn't that, where I wasn't living in a place like that. My goal was to, as a detective working in white supremacy organization, was to identify. My objective was to identify who the shot callers were, the main players within the criminal street gang. Okay. And it was to investigate them for their gang activities, for narcotic sales, and all the other things that they're involved in. And I would pick cases on them. So we would do controlled buys, where we would have informants buy drugs from them, and surveillance, and a slew of other investigative tactics to investigate the organization, and then execute search warrants after writing them. Execute search warrants and take the gang down, and use gang enhancements, which are increased sentencing guidelines to do it. And so after years of investigating them, we were able to successfully arrest and convict enough of the shot callers to put the gang out of business.
Right.
And the things that they were involved in, not just the hate crimes, but victimizing people in our society on a daily basis, to further and enhance their own power, I would say, their own image on the street. Building for white supremacists, which are considered transitional gangs. They're not territory-based gangs like you would typically see with an African American gang or a Hispanic gang. Those are more turf-based gangs. White supremacists, they basically go anywhere and everywhere, and they're less about neighborhood and they're more about money. They're opportunists. And so, they sell drugs and they victimize others, and it was a real problem where I worked. And so we put a huge effort into investigating them. I worked very closely with the Department of Homeland Security. And when I did that, I was at a smaller agency. We didn't have the resources that were required to do the job, essentially. We were more successful in partnering with larger agencies who had the money, who had the equipment to do it. And I created, during my 10 years as a detective, these informal task forces. And everybody in the area helped out. Because all of us and all the different agencies were experiencing the same sort of problems that my agency was, in terms of what the white supremacists did in our communities that deteriorated the moral fabric of our community, and the victimization of innocent people. And so it for me, that's where my area of focus really was. It was at that time, though, I was also working on homicide wiretaps. I was, let's say like at a larger agency, and NYPD or LAPD. When you go into a unit, you're assigned to homicide, you're assigned to burglary or narcotics. Being in a larger agency provided me the opportunity to work all of the different crimes. So I may have been assigned in the Special Investigations Unit working gangs and narcotics, but when we had a double homicide, I would assist with that, And so it was, during that time, the thrill of my life, even though, I was able to do everything I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I never thought that I'd be establishing and making relationships and friendships with people from other agencies and doing a surveillance up in the sky in an airship, or working with some of the best guys ever who taught me. These were senior detectives, and doing what's called international controlled deliveries. When dope comes across the border, and we'd follow it to a pad, and so they called ICDs. So I got a lot of experience. I was very grateful, very lucky, very fortunate. But it was in those moments as a detective that in not dealing with my own mental health issues, that I started the slow process of my own downfall.
So as that downfall's happening, you must have a sense for, you're in a very dangerous job.
Right.
And you're dealing with extremely dangerous people. So there's already stress. You're already blowing through all your cortisol. That's how I was, right?
Yeah.
All my pathways in my brain are like, let's just get bigger for cortisol, and that'll be our default go-to response, right?
Yeah.
How long can someone really effectively do that job without constant mental care?
Right.
And with all the stressors, how long can someone realistically do that and come out damaged? Obviously, it's kind of a weird number because you don't speak for everybody, but it seems like it's like going to be a hockey player and coming back with all your teeth. It doesn't seem like that's possible.
Right.
So how long can someone do that kind of work, that level of intensity, that level of danger?
It's a good question. It's a good point. And I've seen it happen both ways, where someone can experience that and go through that and phase out real quickly, and other officers who experience that can hold on and live that way for a long period of time. So I don't know that there's really a number. I don't think that there is. But what I have seen is the aftermath and the high-risk behavior that they engage in, and what happens to their bodies and their minds physiologically. You were talking about cortisol levels.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about the cortisol levels, and not just that, but adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
The adrenaline dump and the roller coaster ride that when a traumatic experience happens, and the toxins that are being released in the body. All of those things are never really talked about. I had to learn that later on after I retired and in my healing journey. It's amazing what the mind does.
As we got, like, you would come back from a patrol in our case, and you're out for hours and hours walking up and down mountains, and you're just physically wiped out.
Right.
Well, too bad. You've got patrol reports to write, and you've got to prep for tomorrow because you're going to do the same damn thing. And every now and then, I was in a position where, like, hey, today was a down day. I was going to write reports. Everybody else chill.
Right.
But you don't get that many down days even still, right? So it was energy drinks and guys that dipped. And it was like, oh, we got to work longer? Here's another dip.
Right.
Here's another energy drink. And we burned the back end of our life with these things.
100%.
Because the pace was such that, I couldn't hand my job. There were times where I had a 36-hour day sitting in a chair chasing a terrorist from a computer, like gathering intel, trying to get the guys who were operating packages, right? And if I got up and got out of that moment, the person who sat down would lose, say, 20% of the knowledge that I had built up. It's all there, but by the time they get caught up, it's hours and hours later.
You want to maintain the continuity of the case.
So I would just sit and be like, just bring me food.
Yeah.
But I'm not even talking to anybody. I was putting my hand like, just bring me food, and then food would show up.
Yeah.
Like, because I was so focused, right?
Yeah.
You busting what that's like.
100%. It's very similar, and thank you for your service.
Yeah.
You being overseas, the same thing occurs in law enforcement. So let's say it's a time-sensitive case. Let's say there's a homicide, and now we're racing against the clock, and we need to execute a search warrant immediately to get into that house. Mm-hmm. What you just described is what I experienced.
Yes.
Here I am. I'm like, go tell, get the surveillance guys, go get me those plates, go get me to do this. And then you got people coming in, and I'm like, look, just go get me an energy drink. I would get a Monster or a Red Line at the time, which was, popular. And go get me some Taco Bell, and you just keep going. There's the risk factors, though, unfortunately, and what happened are detrimental to your health. We just don't take care of ourselves. And, I'm sure you've experienced this, especially in serving our country. When we graduate from the academy, we're made to feel invincible because it goes beyond just prepping someone for the street. Psychologically speaking, you have to train. The indoctrination process of being resilient and learning to overcome a threat begins at the academy and gets further indoctrinated in you as your career progresses. So psychologically speaking, just like, you've had to experience, police officers, cannot lose the fight. And they're expected to make split-second decisions immediately, and they are expected to do so in a way that's going to provide an outcome that's successful and use impeccable judgment during all of those factors that are being, that their officers facing in that moment, and fight all natural tendencies like fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that decision-making stuff and what happens to, like what happened with me, you're expected to do those things, and along your way, what you're talking about with cortisol levels, when your body just starts getting pounded like that, and you start psychologically experiencing trauma that is left untreated, you start making poor decisions. You start losing your capacity to make, sound judgments, whereas you otherwise probably wouldn't have started to, experience, unfortunately. And for me, after that DUI, I didn't understand anything about trauma or our responses to it until I got clean and then went up to a trauma retreat, which ended up saving my life, number one, and began my own healing journey because I started understanding trauma and the body's responses to it.
I went to one of my many regional or PTSD meetings that I go to, like my overall case manager today, and she's like, "Hey, don't forget next week you're starting your trauma therapy."
Yeah,
and I'm like, "Well, thank God we finally got to that."
Yeah, right.
Because in intake they're like, "What happened to you?" And I'm like, first off, fuck you. I don't want to tear all that open here for a fucking intake.
Yeah.
I got plenty. Let's just start at the beginning. But yeah, and then you're like, well, there's this trauma and there's this trauma. Oh, don't forget this stuff that I've been hiding for years, and that all caused this whole thing.
Right.
So how did you unsort that whole fucked up package of shit?
Well, so first of all, when you said, what happened to me, that is literally like I've been asked that, and I've asked myself that.
Yeah.
And when you can't see beyond what's right in front of you, like that cup right there, that's an impossible question to answer. And it wasn't until I got into the work, what happened to me and how did I unpack it? I had to understand, first of all, I had to make the decision to care enough about my life, which basically I was motivated by my son. Mm-hmm. He became my reason for living.
Good.
It wasn't until I started unpacking things that I understood essentially the anatomy of trauma and what happened. How did I do that, and what did I learn? When I went to that trauma retreat, the first thing that they do to you is they give you a little button to wear on your shirt that says JFU, which means just fucked up. You know what I mean? We basically had to accept we're just fucked up.
Yeah.
I knew that I had so many years of untreated trauma that I had to basically expose myself to all different treatment modalities. I did EMDR. I started, for as silly as it sounds, especially in law enforcement, especially maybe for the military, mindfulness. I had to practice mindfulness meditation.
That's what I do too.
Yeah, I had to learn how to live with an attitude of gratitude, because absent that, you're stuck in this self-loathing, self-pity party that, can last for years, and you're confused about why you are the way you are now. What was PTSD and how I went through.
Have you been reading my file?
No, I went through. It's funny because I can tell you. You understand. So, when I went to therapy, I had a psychologist who was just a phenomenal psychologist who had treated police officers and understood. He was culturally competent. He was clinically competent in his ability to treat a police officer in trauma. And I did exposure therapy, which was huge for me.
Okay.
And neurofeedback. I did all of it simultaneously, essentially. And I had to hit it really hard because there was so much to unpack.
Yeah. One of the things that you would think that, these guys are going to be in this high-risk, high-stress situation. We're asking a lot of them. Let's make sure that they're getting constant counseling. I know for me, wouldn't work. Be like, hey, we're wasting my fucking time. I got shit to do. Talk to me later, And so the thought to help and wrap our arms around that person, get your fucking arms off me. I got shit to do, I'm out here on the tip of the spear. There's no help out here. We're going to go do it. I don't really have a question, but I just want to
you make a very good point, because you basically what you're saying is right. It's we got, you're on the SWAT team. You're also, a detective. You have to execute a search warrant on a homicide suspect who's a career criminal and a documented gang member with a rap sheet that's 45 pages long. And you want me to go talk to somebody about how I feel?
Yeah.
What does that even mean? To me, it was foreign. It's like speaking Chinese, And so, unfortunately, knowing now what I know, looking back, the only way I believe that a police officer now can survive in today's society is by looking inward and giving himself or herself permission to work on self-care. And self-care should be as important as all of the
Hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
And self-care should be as important as all of the perishable skills that we train so hard to maintain and focus on and make a priority. We should also do the same thing with self-care. I believe now, looking back, that there should be a yearly check-in, minimum, a yearly check-in, not an evaluation where they feel threatened that, hey, if they say something, they could potentially be, lose their career or have like a fitness for duty.
Right? Like, I don't trust any of you in the system. You don't know what I know. You don't go where I go. So I'm not going to tell you shit because next thing you know, you're going to take my gun.
100%.
I don't trust you fuckers.
Right. And that's where the barriers happen.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are not enough clinically competent clinicians and culturally competent clinicians that understand the subculture of law enforcement and the wide array of the medical issues that occur in, we don't talk about emergency responder exhaustion syndrome or compassion fatigue, adrenal fatigue. We don't talk about hypervigilance and what hypervigilance does over a course of time. If that's your baseline, like it was for me, hypervigilance, being constantly on edge and at a 10 over the course of time, it kills you.
Yeah.
It kills you. And
either directly or through your own shitty decisions because
exactly.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I have, I look back and I wonder, I believed I was always at least, ethical and that my partners were ethical and all these things. But when you look at police officers and firefighters that make decisions that go against your own moral code, you wonder, like, how does that happen? Now, don't mistake what I'm saying. There are people that do not deserve to be police officers. There are people who should never be in the business because they're not good people. They don't deserve the honor of wearing a badge. But when you take somebody who is a good person and has always been, has lived a life of integrity, and they make decisions, I didn't understand until I got into my healing journey, like, why does that happen? And it happens because officers engage in high-risk behavior, right? That whether it's multiple sexual partners, gambling, drug abuse, substance abuse, drinking, all of those things, right? That emulates the feeling they have when they're working.
Sure.
Right? And the adrenaline rush. It's the adrenaline rush begins the chase. It's the chase of that feeling that they try to emulate. And unfortunately, it wasn't for me until I retired that which was hard for me because of what happened with me and my family.
Sure.
Without having the support that is very much needed.
Well, that's the other thing about addiction. And I'm not letting Joe ask any questions.
No. You're doing an amazing job.
But the thing with addiction is it's like the one disease that manifests in your family. Mm-hmm. Where they get the shitty thing. Like, first off, they can't see the wound on you. If it was on your chest, this is something I say all the time. If they could see your damage, they'd be like, fuck, dude, sit down, chill out. What do you need?
Yeah, 100%.
They would handle it differently, but they don't. Yes. Instead, your shitty decisions directly impact their life in a way that costs them money, costs them trust, costs them.
Yeah.
And our inability to respond properly to our outside input until we learn to go, wait, mindfulness, like, slow down. Actually, I live in Orange County. There's not someone behind the tree.
Yeah, right. 100%.
So that all manifests horribly in your family, and they're the ones that get the tumor. And so, yeah, rightfully, they get pissed off at us because we've treated them like shit. And then you throw the addiction part in, and it just gets... I can understand why people in general turn their backs on addicts, because they have to at some point, because there's so much damage there.
So what you're saying is so important, and it's and I want to talk about why. First off, there are addicts, and then there are people who are not addicts that, through the process of numbing themselves, become addicted and dependent.
Right.
Right. I talk about the family structure and the breakdown of it. When a police officer when he starts developing maladaptive coping skills, the transferred trauma from a police officer to his family it should be talked about more. And this goes for not just police officers, but military. When they come back from deployment and they have experienced the trauma that they have, it's the same thing with varying degrees. I don't compare, being a police officer trauma is trauma.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the transfer trauma that my family experienced was so significant that their response to what happened to me, unfortunately, wasn't what it should be. And it has nothing to do with who they are as people, because my family they're wonderful people.
Sure.
But you can tell by their responses that they had experienced a lot of things that, like I did, just through the transference of the trauma. And so how do you pick up the pieces? There's so many things. How do you,
And their trauma is significant, so they've got to get past that and then work on, if they're capable, forgiveness. And that doesn't work on a family's schedule. Like, it works on its own schedule.
Yeah. Pain. The pain, man, it turns into anger.
Yeah.
And people do things to each other out of anger and spite that they otherwise wouldn't have done.
Yeah.
And one of my biggest lessons that I've had to learn was forgiveness. I had to first forgive myself.
Sure. Have you?
And I have.
Okay.
I have. And I had to I learned to make these little movies, these videos that was part of my own healing journey. And one of the videos that I made was on forgiveness. And it was a message to my family, of which I hope to, my parents are starting to come back around.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, it takes time.
It does. And I wouldn't be able to understand where I'm at now had I not gotten into the healing journey, which goes into now. I wouldn't be here with Joe and his wife, with Ashley. I wouldn't be where I am now today had I not committed to my own healing journey. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful. I talked to you guys before we got on here and did this, about how much this support now for my cause and what my vision means to me, because this is the first time in 3 years, since I retired, that I've had anyone around me here to help support and highlight and go on to this next phase and this next journey. I'm not used to this. Let's
talk about that part, because I can definitely identify with that. As someone like Joe comes into your life, he's not going to kick down a door with you. And so for me, I know from my point of view, I'm like, wait, these people actually care for me? Bullshit.
Right.
They're actually going to work hard and give 100%. Me this help. Or like they'll cut a check to keep me above water. Like, that's not real.
Right.
The people that support me are the people that I roll with, my gang. Right. And so talk about your process towards accepting that there are good people that actually are like, no, I'm desperate to help you. And then going, I can take this help, and it's not weakness.
Right. Such a good point. And I'll be honest with you, it's still hard for me.
Sure.
I'm not gonna lie. Because we feel like we're not worthy. We begin to feel like we're not worthy, especially so what happened with me was this. One of my guardian angels in life was Dr. Heather Williams at the Orange County Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
And I started speaking publicly with her, but I would come home to an empty home after my family left.
Right.
And so she reached out to the Patriotic Service Dog Foundation. Tom Tackett, the founder of the Patriotic Service Dog Foundation, at the time they were just doing military vets, but Heather told her my story. Told him my story, and he understood my circumstances and decided he was going to give me a dog. That's how I got Stryker. And through the Patriotic Service Dog Foundation, who kind of became my de facto family at the time, I met Joe and I met Heather, his wife. And we started seeing each other at events. And it's very hard for a police officer or someone, I think, to ask for help. It's hard to accept the fact that there are people that do care, because you alienate yourself from the rest of society when you have the us versus them philosophy. I met Joe maybe about a year ago at an event, and then would see him in other events. I saw him at the Patriotic Service Dog Gala recently, and his wife, Heather, and kind of checked back in with them after not seeing them for a while and told them kind of what my new plan was, my new vision. And they asked if, they offered to help. They said, if there's anything that we can do to help you, please let us know. And I sat and stood on that for a while, and I didn't know really what to do. And then I reached out to Joe. And what Joe is doing and what his wife's doing and what Ashley is doing for me and trying to help the Resiliency Project and what we're going to start doing for first responders in the country has been so overwhelming. And I'm so grateful that in the beginning, I kind of looked at him like, what do you really want from me? Or what is really happening? When's the next shoe going to drop?
Am I standing on a rug? Are you going to pull this out from under me?
Yeah, because,
where does this end up?
Exactly.
Yeah. And wait, just with that right there, let me interject just a second, which is what I found a good role for Heather and I in a lot of the stuff that we do with Patriotic Service Dogs and Save the Brave, and now with is just to listen.
Right.
Just to listen. And if you need something, you'll ask.
Yeah.
And that's what we always wait for. When you need something, when you're ready, when anybody's ready, they'll ask. But we're just there to listen. Because we found a need between our military vets and our first responders to just listen.
Yeah.
To just listen. That's it. Simple.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that, and then I'm going to let the guest talk again. But so in my hometown, we lost a guy named Terry Marcacci, to suicide. And as we all struggle with like what I should have done or what I could have done, all of us, this is Pete preaching, need to get out and be in service of other people who maybe don't have as much. Because here's what happens. One, first off, charity isn't supposed to be easy. You're not supposed to be like, oh, thank God I'm writing a check today. Thank God I'm getting up early on a Saturday. Like, that shit should be hard if you're doing it right. And if you're doing it right, you're going to interact with Joe and all kinds of other people, and you're going to run into this network of people that are there because of compassion and help and mutual values. And so if you are struggling, I'm going to tell you right now, it saved my life in part, was being of service to other people, being available to help, and stop worrying about the woe is me stuff.
Right.
So I encourage anybody who's like not sure what they want to do, they're fighting depression, pick a charity and start. You can change your mind. You can go to a different one.
Yeah.
But just go, I want to help. And if it's your time, your presence, your attention, your money, whatever it is, get in and start giving a hand, and you're going to find a lot of hands coming back towards you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, in meeting with Joe, I felt like when I started my healing journey, I felt, okay, I can trust two people now. I can trust Dr. Heather Williams, and but she's culturally calm, she gets it, and I can trust Tom Tackett and Terry and the foundation, because those are that's not like my little safe place, Everyone else I can't trust, and in meeting Joe and in meeting Ashley, who is playing a huge part in what we're doing as well, who didn't serve and were not police officers. They're regular people with good hearts,
right?
Who are supportive of law enforcement and military, first responders. For me, it was almost like in meeting them, it restored my faith in humanity. How do you have these individuals who believe, in being of service to others and want to add to the cause and to the mission?
Sure.
It says everything about their character, and it was probably one of the most powerful moments for me, especially after my first lunch, first private lunch with Joe. It's one of the most powerful moments for me.
Did he make you pay like he made me pay?
You know what? I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget what Joe said to me and what he did that day.
Wow.
It was a special day. And the other thing too was at the same time that Heather started coming into my life, where they basically were like, you know what, like they saw my situation. I'm sitting there, I'm about to lose a house, I'm financially I'm trying to recover from the last however many years of struggling, and they're like, look, we got you. we're going to help you with, the back end and try to figure out all the things I didn't know how to do. At the same time, Ashley came into the picture, and I started seeing the support. I mean, Ashley works for a financial services company that services first responders and police officers and stuff like that. She shows up at the front door after essentially, finding me on Instagram. She's like, I believe in your message. I'm here to help. And so the three of them together.
What?
Yeah. Basically, she's like, she gives me a call. We reached out. We talk. And she's like, I believe in what you're doing. And I'm spending day after day after day with police officers. I go on ride-alongs with them, and I hear what they have to go through. And there's no outlet for them to get help, and it's too hard. There's too much red tape. And I believe in what you're doing, and I'm here to help. She's been with me ever since. And this is like this team of extraordinary individuals that I will forever be grateful for.
Tell us more about the Resiliency Project.
The Resiliency Project, the idea behind it was that life is like a project. There's just constant building and constant, and resiliency is one's own ability to bounce back after a traumatic event. And so I thought, what about the Resiliency Project as my Instagram handle? And what I really wanted to do was to normalize the experiences and the feelings that first responders go through and have every day through my messages and the videos that I make, to help them feel that they're not alone in what they're experiencing, and to try to help validate their own feelings and to try to create a pathway towards healing for them. And so I have plans now that where we're going to be able to change, I think, the ball game in terms of streamlining the process of getting help for first responders, the help that they need. And I think what we're going to do is create a process by which we're going to be able to get them not just the help that they need, but the funds to do it. And I'm going to leave it at that until we get a little bit further ahead.
You got some work to do.
I got some work to do, but this has become my reason for everything. I'll tell you this, I talk about a lot of times, especially in research shows this, that there's nothing more important in law enforcement, especially law enforcement, and I'm sure you've experienced this in the military, than pure acceptance and pure solidarity. You want your partners to believe in you and to trust you, and you want to get their acceptance. With Joe, just in talking with him and sharing my experiences with him and him listening and always answering the phone and always being there, created for the first time in my life my own ability to do that with someone that was non-law enforcement.
Right.
Joe always says, iron sharpens iron.
That's true.
And I think that there's a lot of value and meaning behind that. I think that right now, with where we're at, the suicide rate is through the roof. We will have lost more police officers this year than at any other point in history due to suicide. The suicide rate this year trumps the last 3 years. And in the last 3 years, more police officers have died by suicide than in the line of duty.
Yeah.
And that's, I think we're at like 165 or I don't have the numbers. I think maybe 170. That's just the number that's reported.
Oh, right.
That's not. Sure. That's an underreported number.
Yeah.
And so we need to change that.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't count the guys like you who drive into a fence and actually die, and they're through their own actions, their own neglect, with no care for their life, for sure. And then the other ones that slip through the cracks, it's an important message. And look, first off, thanks for what you do. I mean, literally, while we were setting up for the show, you were fighting for someone's life, a fellow officer. And we don't got to talk about their case, but you're doing this actively every day. And I get a lot of this too, where I get the phone call like, hey, I'm on the edge. Yeah. And I'm going to respond now. How do I respond to that? It happens all the time. Or so-and-so jumped off the edge. Yeah. And you're just like, damn, I wish, I don't know what else to do. But there are certainly plenty of people that are in desperate need of help, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think what needs to really start taking shape is that this is a conversation now that has to be at the forefront of every agency in this country's mission. They have to acknowledge that, unfortunately, we can no longer remain quiet or silent about suicide. And suicide is the end result of the accumulation of untreated trauma and the array of things and complexities that come with trauma, and what we do in our trauma with our maladaptive coping skills that leads to trauma. If we can help normalize this entire process and change what happens during the trauma process, we can reduce the suicide rate. And so that's what we're all trying to do at this point. That is what I'm trying to do with Joe and Heather and Ashley and the team that we're now developing at the Resiliency Project.
Man, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. And I love talking with you. You're pretty amazing yourself. Your story is pretty amazing, and I love it. So thank you for having me on.
Well, that's my pleasure. And Joe, thanks for co-hosting. Pretty easy duty for you. One quick comment. You were good.
Pretty funny.